Welcome, everyone, and thanks for bringing me in today. As your sustainability consultant, I've put together this explainer because, frankly, we need an urgent strategic briefing. Today, we're taking a really hard look at evaluating supply chain transparency, and crucially, the management tools we're currently relying on. For a long time, supply chain labor was treated as this distant, purely ethical issue. But that landscape has violently shifted. This isn't just about doing the right thing anymore. It is absolutely about protecting the fundamental value and the operational continuity of this firm.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the sheer scale of the problem has to be our first wake-up call. 50 million. That is the number of people trapped in modern slavery globally on any given day. And of that, about 27.6 million are specifically in forced labor. But here's the real reality check for us. 86% of that forced labor is happening right in the private economy. It's generating a staggering $236 billion in illegal profits every single year. So we're not talking about statistics floating around in a vacuum here. We're talking about real people, often hidden deep within the supply chains of ordinary products. The very products that our firm and firms exactly like ours put our names on.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1. The blind spot, 2. The bottom line, 3. The illusion of control, 4. The liability twist, 5. The regulatory hammer, and finally, 6. The board's playbook.
Right. To set the baseline for our strategy today, we really need to clarify our definitions. It is incredibly common to hear management say, well, our suppliers pay the legal minimum wage. But the minimum wage is just a legal floor. In a lot of sourcing countries, it is way, way below a living wage, which is the actual amount a worker needs to just afford basic food, housing, healthcare, and schooling for their family. This gap is crucial, folks. A fully compliant supplier can absolutely still pay poverty wages. And household poverty? That is the absolute root driver of forced and child labor. So we pay the legal minimum is a really weak defense. We need to be looking at living wages.
Which brings us right to Section 1, the blind spot, where we'll be redefining Scope 3 labor.
The hard truth is that our firm's biggest human rights exposure actually sits over workers we don't even employ, in facilities we don't even own. Now, we usually have great visibility into our Tier 1 direct suppliers, the assembly folks, but that visibility fades incredibly fast. By Tier 2, think component makers, fabric mills, it's partial at best. And by the time you hit Tier 3 and beyond, the farms, the mines, the raw materials, it is a total blind spot. And here's the kicker. Those deepest tiers are exactly where the absolute worst abuses, like forced and child labor, are most likely to happen. Simply put, you just cannot manage what you haven't mapped.
And that leads us to Section 2, the bottom line, focusing on concrete financial and operational risks.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stakes. £1 billion. That is the amount of share value completely wiped out from the UK fashion firm Boohoo back in 2020. Investigative reporting uncovered that workers in a Leicester factory, literally just a few miles from their headquarters, were being paid as little as £3.50 an hour in terrible conditions during the pandemic. Now, these worst suppliers Boohoo didn't even own, but the brand took the hit anyway. Their shares plummeted by about 40%. Having a modern slavery statement on their website did not protect them. It was the lack of visibility and governance that failed them. Distance from the abuse is absolutely no protection once the brand gets named in the press. If we break down exactly how these labor problems reach our bottom line, there are 4 really clear risk channels. First, operationally. Unsafe conditions lead to things like factory fires or strikes, which immediately paralyze our supply. Second, reputationally. As we just saw with Boohoo, brand scandals absolutely destroy consumer trust and can evaporate market cap practically overnight. Third, legally. We are seeing a massive increase in lawsuits targeting parent firms directly for the actions of their distant suppliers. And fourth, regulatorily. As we're going to discuss in a minute, we are now facing outright import bans and having shipments seized right at the border.
Knowing those risks, we've got to move to Section 3, the illusion of control. Let's talk about genuine value versus compliance theater.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sharp contrast between what actually works and what we frankly just pretend works. We have to learn to distinguish between genuine value and theater. Genuine value means implementing positive labor practices, things like active engagement, real training, paying living wages, because the evidence clearly shows that treating workers well actively lifts productivity, quality, and resilience. Compliance theater, on the other hand, that's relying on a one-day pre-announced factory audit with zero follow-up. Think about it. Forced labor is specifically designed to be hidden from auditors. An audit might give us a nice, clean piece of paper to file away, but it fundamentally hides the ongoing problem rather than actually fixing it.
And that reliance on theater leads us straight into Section 4, the liability twist, or why labels can actually become liabilities.
Let's use the global cocoa industry as our sort of Trojan horse case study here. Ivory Coast and Ghana grow roughly 65% of the world's cocoa. Now, over the last 2 decades, the chocolate industry has spent an estimated $215 million trying to address child labor, and they heavily relied on third-party certification labels to do it. But despite all those labels and all those millions of dollars, research conducted for the U.S. Department of Labor found that about 1.5 million children are still engaged in cocoa-related labor in this dominant region.
And here is the really harsh reality, the twist, if you will. When an NGO or a journalist uncovers children working on farms deep inside a firm's so-called certified supply chain, that glossy certificate overnight flips from a brand asset into a major legal liability. It literally becomes legal evidence that the firm was out there claiming more than it could actually monitor or prove, because the label merely covered a tiny sample and a fleeting moment in time, not the whole chain. We simply cannot certify our way out of a systemic supply chain problem.
Because, folks, the era of voluntary reporting is completely over. Welcome to Section 5, the regulatory hammer, navigating the new legal era.
Let's move to and see how this builds a tightening legal net around us. It really started with the tragedy, the 2013 Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh that killed over 1,000 garment workers. That horrible event set off a decade of new law. By 2015, the UK Modern Slavery Act mandated transparency reporting. Then in 2021, the US introduced the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, or UFLPA. In 2024, the EU passed the CSDDD, that's the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which created a harmonized duty to actually prevent and mitigate harms, not just report on them. And while the 2026 EU Omnibus scaled back some of the thresholds, it completely cemented these regulatory duties into hard law. The whole paradigm has permanently shifted from voluntary codes of conduct to mandatory due diligence.
Just to anchor this right back to our financial risk, look specifically at the US ULFPA. It essentially operates on a prove it or it stays out philosophy. Under this law, imports linked to high-risk regions are flat out banned unless the firm can definitively prove that they are clean. Shipments are literally being seized at the border. So supply chain opacity now leads directly to seized inventory and lost revenue. It's not just a PR problem anymore. It is an immediate, painful commercial hit.
So, the big question, how do we actually lead through this? That brings us to our final section, the board's playbook, focusing on the due diligence checklist.
When management actually finds an abuse in the chain, they typically present us with 3 corporate moves. Strategy 1 is to audit. It's cheap, sure, but as we discussed, it just leads to staged compliance and hidden abuses. Strategy 2 is to engage. This means actually helping the supplier fix the problem by paying for real change. It's definitely slower, but it maintains our leverage and, frankly, improves human lives. Strategy 3 is to exit. Just cut the supplier immediately. Now, while exiting looks really decisive and clears the legal risk off our plate fast, the workers just lose their jobs, and the firm loses any power to actually fix the underlying issue. The law, especially the EU's new CSDDD, is now actively pushing us to choose engagement over exit whenever humanly possible.
So the crucial point is this checklist. This is exactly what you, as the board, must ask management tomorrow morning. 1. Have we mapped our supply chain beyond Tier 1, all the way down to our high-risk sources? 2. Are we relying purely on the theater of audits, or are we actively paying for real capacity building? 3. Do we have a mathematical, clear living wage commitment? 4. Do workers deep in the chain actually have a safe, active grievance channel? 5. When we find the inevitable problems, is our immediate reflex to engage and fix it, or just quietly exit? And finally, are our systems actually ready with the hard evidence required for CSDDD and UFLPA enforcement?
I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to ponder as we close this explainer. When your brand inevitably finds abuse deep in its supply chain, and let's be honest, if you look properly, you will find it, what should the firm do first? Should you stay and use your leverage to fix it, or do you leave to protect the label? Your answer to that question is going to reveal your actual readiness for this new era, and it will define the true substance of this firm's supply chain transparency. Thank you so much for your focus today.